Well, if you're a fan of John Mayer's tone from the Continuum era and you've been wanting that Mark I Marshall BluesBreaker sound without paying just the crazy prices that they're going for on Reverb, it's time to celebrate because it looks like Marshall is finally reissuing the Mark I BluesBreaker. About a year ago, there were actually rumors of this reissue pedal going around the internet, and one website out of Europe, one like guitar dealer out of Europe, actually had posted the pedal on their website for pre-order, and then they ended up taking them down, which is kind of interesting. But that was kind of our first idea that, okay, it looks like Marshall might actually be reissuing the Mark I BluesBreaker. And fast forward about a year later, a bunch of photos have been leaking over the internet over the past couple of days of this pedal. A few people have actually got them in hand early, and the pedal looks identical to the original Mark I BluesBreaker. Marshall has gone just for a true and faithful, cosmetically at least, recreation of the original circuit. Now, of course, this isn't the first time Marshall has kind of recreated the BluesBreaker pedal circuit. They made what is called the BluesBreaker version 2, or the BB2 as it's called. And funny enough, though, John Mayer actually has been quoted in calling it a bad-sounding pedal, essentially. And it definitely never captured the magic or the mojo of the original pedal, but definitely based on pure aesthetics, at least, of this reissue, it looks like they're going right for that original Marshall BluesBreaker sound. That said, at this time, it's just really impossible to tell how close this pedal is going to be to the original sound. I'm very hopeful that Marshall is going to create, the most accurate modern representation of that original Mark I BluesBreaker circuit. The other thing, though, to remember when it comes to the Mark I BluesBreaker circuit is that there's actually two different versions of the Mark I BluesBreaker. The earlier version is the one that's a bit more sought after for John Mayer fans especially. That is the one that we pretty much can almost 100% certainty say that John actually used back during the Continuum era, just based off of pictures of his settings.
They're never off. If they're off, then they won't be employed. So as you can see, all the red lights indicating that the power is on is there. And then
the original circuit, you really had to crank all three knobs to get anything out of it, to get really a not usable tone, but something that, at least when I owned my Mark I BluesBreaker, something that I really enjoyed. You pretty much had to crank all three knobs, and of course pulling it apart and looking at the circuit board, it was the Mark I version, which, as we know, kind of needs to be almost dying to get anything out of it. And keep in mind, again, this is the sound for Gravity. So there's not a lot of gain, there's not a lot of a volume boost, but it's really adding some sweetness to your tone and, adding some overall dynamics to your sound.
If you don't mind, turn the volume on the BluesBreaker up like a pinch.
More or less, and the second version, definitely they kind of fix that a little bit where you can get a lot more out of the pedal. There's a lot more gain and volume on tap for the second version. So hopefully Marshall has gone and kind of taken the best of both worlds when it comes to the Mark I BluesBreaker sound. They're keeping the magic of the very early circuit and that sound, but maybe just tweaking it and adjusting it so that there's a bit more usability out of the original pedal. Because I owned a Mark I BluesBreaker, and once I got my Klon Centaur, I just got rid of it. I was kind of like, I'm not really feeling the BluesBreaker thing, but I've definitely been wanting another original BluesBreaker because that is the sound of Continuum after all, and it is a pretty different thing when you compare it to something like a Klon style pedal. It's a bit of a different animal for sure. I do think it's kind of funny that Marshall is choosing this exact time to reissue the Mark I BluesBreaker. I mean, the prices of the original are going nowhere but up, but a couple years ago, there really wasn't a great option on the market for this circuit. Of course, you have the King of Tone, which really is its own thing, and you can't really classify it as a BluesBreaker anymore. You have like the more Blues Crab, which is, a very good affordable clone for, how much it costs. It's a good sounding pedal. And then you have like the Brown application had the Protein and now the Carbon, which is just a more recent addition to, versions of the circuit. And you also have the Snouse Black Box, but the wait times for that pedal are just kind of crazy. And I think he's still making them at this point, but Snouse has always been kind of, a bit up in the air in terms of, production and stuff like that. It's been very hard to get that pedal. So it's not, the best option if someone asks what's a good pedal for the BluesBreaker sound. It's easy to say the Snouse Black Box, but you're either going to be waiting a very long time for that pedal or paying, again, kind of crazy prices on reverb for one of these pedals for people who have them in hand. So that's never really been the best option either. But the Marshall Reissue, I think, is going to be very promising. Time will only tell until people actually get these in hand in terms of getting demos out, and I definitely want to hear one in person as well. Maybe I'll compare it to Mark 1 later down the road on the channel. That could be really cool to just hear the differences and see if the Mark 1 actually stands up to the original for sure, but I think it's a really promising option at this time. You really have to laugh, though, at a company like Ibanez, where people have been asking for a TS10 reissue for years now, and Ibanez almost just refuses to make it, which is kind of weird. It's like, Marshall's finally come around to doing the Mark 1 BluesBreaker sound. I don't understand why Ibanez isn't making a TS10 reissue. There's lots of companies now, even like the Bonsai has a TS10 mode on it. There's lots of companies that make a TS10 clone or a TS10 inspired pedal, and it's kind of like, Ibanez, you guys made the original version of the pedal. Why aren't you making it? But at the same time, Ibanez has reissued the WH10 wah pedal, which is the must-have wah pedal for John Frusciante fans. They've pretty much reissued that pedal twice just due to the demand from Frusciante fans alone. They're pretty much the only people who care about that wah pedal, and both times Ibanez has failed to make it stand up to the original. They made the V2 WH10, and everyone complained that it never sounded like the original, and that's why you have someone like Wilson Effects who's modding all of them essentially for Frusciante fans to actually get them to sound how they should. And then they came around and reissued it a third time, and again, it doesn't sound like the original at all. So it's kind of like, even if Ibanez did reissue the TS10, I don't have a lot of faith that they'd actually do a faithful recreation of that circuit, just based on their track record with something like the WH10. They just, I don't really see the point of them reissuing it at all if it doesn't sound like the original, which is what everyone wants. No one wants these reissues sound at all, right? But anyways, you guys, that's a story maybe for another day to get into. Just thinking about the Mark 1 BluesBreaker being reissued, it's kind of got me going, Ibanez, come on. Reissue the TS10. Do you guys not like money? It'll sell like just stupidly good. But there you guys go. Mark 1 BluesBreaker reissue is coming from Marshall. More details, should be very, very soon. Even, Captain Lee from Anderton's, he made a story a while ago just asking if he could borrow someone's old, Mark 1 Marshall pedals. And he was like, I can't really tell you what it's for, but everyone, I think, kind of clued in on that too, being like, well, it's because that reissue is finally coming. That's why you want a Mark 1 BluesBreaker to kind of showcase off against the reissue maybe for their channel. So stay tuned to the Anderton's channel, because I'm sure that video is going to be coming very, very soon. And until the next time, you guys, thank you so much for watching. Take care. We'll see you on the next one.
Anyway, go ahead and click the subscribe button if you like what you see.